we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
The hell did Reagan mean when he said that crazy crap 6 times in a row? His speech writers allegedly didn't know, 'cause he runs the show. Alright. I'm gonna get myself started again. Seriously though. Allegedly, Reagan said that 6 different times, one for each point of the star of Ramthan. And supposedly his speechwriters didn't put it in there. He added it himself. But anyway, I'm not saying he was good or anything. I'm just saying it's kind of a weird thing that he inserted in there himself. So welcome everybody. All right, now we actually get to read. So, even though I've now increased this mic a couple times, it keeps trying to go back down every time it restarts, so I don't know what to do. I'll just try to speak in an angle at the mic so that goes through here. Which page was I on here? Intention. Oh, senile decrepitude. I remember that. Senile decrepitude. If anybody ever asks you about Joe Biden, you can make yourself sound real smart and say, I'm tired of his senile decrepitude. So now I remember. Page 113. So I'll read the last paragraph, which I usually do. And remember, this is a critique on Mein Kampf, labeling Hitler as what I call the benevolent psychopath. That's literally Luke, I am your father. So, and I want you to know he's not the main one. They just demonize him as the main one, so you don't realize there's more than one gremlin that came out of Gizmo. If you remember the Gremlins movie. It's like they don't pay attention to Stripe. Pay attention to all these other ones. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. You understand? So, Mr. Hittite, as I call him, because he has a Hittite nose, he is Hamitic, and yet he wants to make fun of Africans, even though he's more genetically related to an Well, wait a minute. That skull chart, I think that skull chart disproves that. When he talks about Africans, he means the Semitic ones, by the way. Because most Africans have elongated skulls. They have European skulls. But anyway. But they're black, right? You understand how, like, a skin color is not an ethnicity? Jeez. I literally seen a man who turns from white to black. He shaves everything, looks as white as me. His dreads start growing out. He turns as black as Bob Marley. Skin color is not an ethnicity. This is the most foolish thing. So anyway, Mr. Hittite continues. This conglomerate spectacle of heterogeneous races, which the capital of the dual monarchy presented, this motley of Czechs, Poles, Hungarians, Ruthenians, Serbs, and Croats, etc., and always that bacillus, which is the solvent of human society. The J, he says, it really is the true Hebrew, the true Semitic, the true Christian, regardless of blood, the true Torah follower, regardless of blood, is the solvent of human society. It moisturizes and renewal. That's where you get lamed from, the scholar. But of course, remember, when he says Jew, that's a cover word for Soviet. Just like when he says social democrats or whatever, and then he gets specific Christian social democrats because he's trying to mirror or veil his hatred for Shemitic thought, for scripture. Here and there and everywhere. The here and there and everywhere sounds pretty paranoid, doesn't he? Everywhere, they're in the toaster, they're laughing at me. The whole spectacle was repugnant to me. Really? This dude just hates other people. Like, what's it? Literally, me speaking on these different cameras, I could speak to anybody in the world. It's the most amazing thing. You know what's boring? Only speaking to freaking Americans who think they know everything. I'd love to speak to these Czechs and these Poles and these Hungarians and these Ruthenians and Serbs and Croats. Why not? They probably don't have as much of a struggle when they're thinking. You understand? He says, the gigantic city seemed to be the incarnation of mongrel depravity. Yeah, that's interesting he says that because he has the same skull shape as a Mongol. So what is he saying? Because that's where it comes from. Because people were like, why do these people look like this? Why do they drink their horse's blood? What's going on here? So you get the Huns and different stuff like that. And it doesn't matter your bloodline if you submit to the Most High. It literally says you become a new creation. You become a new creature. You understand? That's why a lot of times when truly evil people actually repent and turn, their faces start looking more softer, more kinder over time. Do you understand? Like, it changes your actual look of your body. I've said it before where I used to have a sloped nose, like a Scandinavian sloped nose, and I started reading scripture at 17 for myself, before I was fully grown into my adult body, and I grew a bridge. Sometimes my nose would make cracking noises and it would hurt. And I would get headaches because my skull was actually fully forming to what it's supposed to be. That's why they had the thinking man. That's how you actually get genetics with different skulls and stuff. This is basic genetics. That if a person develops a skill and they hand it down to their son and their son hands it down to his son, it ends up becoming already easier for the next generation to do physically because their bodies start morphing to it. Their bodies start. That's what the real evolution is. But the spirit comes first, then the physical. That's why most children start out looking very similar skulls and similar noses, unless something was built over time. That's why they can tell Semitic qualities sometimes at birth. Remember Moses, where they saw he was a fine child. So he continues, the German language, which I had spoken from the time of my boyhood, allegedly, was the vernacular idiom of Lower Bavaria. I never forgot that particular style of speech, and I could never learn the Viennese dialect. The longer I lived in that city, the stronger became my hatred for the promiscuous swarm of foreign peoples that had begun to batten on that old nursery ground of German culture. The idea that this state could maintain its further existence for any considerable time was quite absurd. This is the nature of the city, though. It has nothing to do with the people. They can fill it with the same heterogeneous people, and it's going to do the same thing. And that's why later on he's going to say that he thinks the Germans would have gotten to their superior status without the influence of Christianity. It's like, no, that's how you got there. That's how the Most High tests nations. And then this guy comes out at the end and says, nope, Scripture had nothing to do with it. And then he says that Israel didn't actually exist until after the Exodus. I mean, after the exiles returned. He said Israel didn't exist. That's future in this book. We'll get to it. There's other people who say that too. They have a whole religion. But anyway, he continues, Austria was then like a piece of ancient mosaic in which the cohesive cement had dried up and become old and friable. As long as such a work of art remains untouched, it may hold together and continue to exist, but the moment some blow is struck on it, then it breaks up into thousands of fragments. That reminds me of something from Daniel. Therefore, it was now only a question of when the blow would come. You see, this is how they think. They know people like me and many, many other Christians figure things out, and then they start telling people. They start telling their IDF soldiers, and they start convincing them because it makes sense. It's historical. I'm like, yeah, Rome has always persecuted you people. And can you not understand that your government is Roman? And they're commanding Semites to exterminate other Semites? The people that you're commanded to destroy look more like you than your government. And a lot of these people are educated in America, by the way. They get an education in America, and then they start using it to help their own people, and then they just mysteriously get hit by shrapnel or something and they die. Right when they say they're working on a secret project, then all of a sudden, word gets out, I guess. All right, so he continues, because my heart was always with the German Empire, allegedly. Remember, this guy's a Soviet. Like he works like a Jesuit does. Because my heart was always with the German Empire, allegedly, and not with the Austrian monarchy, the hour of Austria's dissolution as a state appeared to me only as the first step towards the emancipation of the German nation. All these considerations intensified my yearning to depart for that country for which my heart had been secretly longing since the days of my youth, allegedly. I hoped that one day I might be able to make my mark as an architect and that I could devote my talents to the service of my country on a large or small scale according to the will of fate. This man never even mentions God. Because he's polytheistic. He's probably pantheist. Most likely a sorcerer. He continues, a final reason was that I longed to be among those who lived and worked in the land from which the movement should be launched, the object of which would be the fulfillment of what my heart had always longed for, namely the union of the country in which I was born with our common fatherland, the German Empire. Yeah, but see, Germany was never heterogeneous. So he's just a liar. He just wants them to see, even in their own children, Semitic qualities, and then they ostracize them. It's like, look, these qualities will still come out a couple generations later. It depends on what the person chooses. The spirit comes first, then the physical. So these guys come in and say, no, it's all physical. And then they get them to literally slay their own brothers, like Cain. So a Cain comes in and teaches everybody to be Cain. Who is Cain? He's a bipolar psychopath. He murders Abel, but then he mourns Abel. That's where you get yin and yang. It's literally kin and Cain. It's just two halves of Cain. It's where you get Batman and Joker. You understand? He continues, there are many who may not understand how such a yearning can be so strong, because it's fake. Usually, like, the empty can rattles the most. You understand? But I appeal especially to two groups of people, of course. The first includes all those who are still denied the happiness I have spoken of, meaning it not being unified, whatever that means to these people. It's unionizing, probably just making them all into Teamsters. Anyway, okay. First includes all those who are still denied the happiness I've spoken of, and the second embraces those who once enjoyed that happiness but had it torn from them by a harsh fate. I turn to all those who have been torn from their motherland and who have to struggle for the preservation of their most sacred patrimony, their native language. Persecuted and harried because of their loyalty and love for the homeland, yearning sadly for the hour when they will be allowed to return to the bosom of their father's household. To these I address my words, and I know that they will understand. No, see, they did that in World War I, by the way. If you look it up, when World War I broke out, the U.S. allowed all its German citizens to go fight for the fatherland so they can exterminate them. Do you understand? And they're just doing it again. That's what they did. There's a lot of Semitic Africans in America. Do you understand? That's why they always start that go back to Africa thing. Like, oh, they'll get some elongated head man with dark skin to tell all the Semitic Africans, let's go back to Africa. And then they just slaughter them there, like in Sudan. Do you understand? Well, people are understanding. It's a matter of life and death, but, what's next on the television is how the Truman Show ends. What's next on the television? He continues, only he who has experienced in his own inner life what it means to be German and yet to be denied the right of belonging to his fatherland can appreciate the profound nostalgia which that enforced exile causes. If you replace the word German with American, that's how much this doesn't make sense. If you look at the history of Germany, they divided them up into 250 states during the so-called Holy Roman Empire because they were controlling them, because they were the only ones who can actually topple the Romans. You can't beat them, join them. Do you understand? So, come on, man. So he continues, page 114. It is a perpetual heartache, and there is no place for joy and contentment until the doors of paternal home are thrown open, and all those through whose veins kindred blood is flowing will find peace and rest in their common Reich. The irony is that you can take Germans, you can take the most pure-blooded of any people, and they'll all have different blood types. It's so easily destroyed, all these ideologies, and they still exist. They're trying to become president right now. They literally have a woman who is a throwaway candidate to let Trump win. It's so incredibly obvious. She's like this spoiled rich girl who's just like Hillary. Oh, I'm just gonna play this role and then I'm gonna be rich after because I'm gonna write a book called like I Persisted Again, or she persisted even more. You know what I mean? Like they're all gonna get like $60 million book deals. You watch. Probably more, but they like that 6. They like the 60, so maybe it'll be a $66 million book deal. I don't know. But whoever these players are, they're going to get millions and millions and millions of dollars after this. It's funny, I commented on one of Trump's posts on that, oh, we're going to win the election because it's supposedly 47 days away. Started yesterday, so now it's 46. And I commented, you will lose on Judgment Day, no matter how many elections you win. And that one got popular. A lot of people started liking that real fast. And I want them to like it, because the more you like it, the more it boosts it up, the more people see it. And eventually, although I'm sure people have seen it up in there, what do they call it? The upper echelons. But I want them to see it. Vienna, he says, was a hard school for me. Really? Aren't you the superior race? Anyway. But it taught me the most profound lessons in my life. Isn't it interesting that he says without the influence of Christianity, Germany would still have become superior. It's like, if you're so superior, why did you even have a struggle in your mind? Oh, it's because of lies. It's like, yeah, but you should be more superior than lies, right? These people are ridiculous. Taught me the most profound lessons of my life. I was scarcely more than a boy when I came to live there, and when I left it, I had grown to be a man of a grave and pensive nature. Oh, gee. In Vienna, be afraid of me. Be very afraid. In Vienna, I acquired the foundations of the Weltanschauung, which seems to just be, the culture of the time, or the you got your finger on the pulse, the common struggle. That's what it seems like. It's just they say it's hard to translate, so they just put the German word. It's like, yeah, because it's probably Babylonian. The more Babylonian, the harder to translate, I would think. So he says, I acquired the foundations of a Weltanschauung in general and developed a faculty for analyzing political questions in particular. That Weltanschauung and the political ideas then formed have never been abandoned, although they were expanded later on in some directions. It is only now that I can fully appreciate how valuable those years of apprenticeship were for me. That is why I've given a detailed account of this period. There in Vienna, stark reality taught me the truths. These are all immaterial. These are like nothing words. How do these things teach you? He just doesn't want to give glory to God, just like it says in Romans. God has shown them, but they don't want to give him glory. So he says, there in Vienna, stark reality taught me the truths that now form the fundamental principles of the party, which within the course of 5 years has grown from modest beginnings to a great mass movement. Course of 5 years. See, it takes a while. That's why you need Joe Biden in the middle. Literally biding time. Joseph means may he add. And Biden is literally biding time. While what? Kamala Devi Harris, the investment of words that cause inflaming sickness in man. And I spoke to one of these IDF officers, and I told him what Kamala Harris' name means in Hebrew, and he's like, yeah, like he couldn't refute it. He's like, so that taught me, this is a native Hebrew speaker, that taught me I'm interpreting these Hebrew things correctly. I even told him the Trump Tarum Pe, and he's like, yeah. Like, it's making him think. I'm using his own language. So it's like, if you want to stop me, come get me. Because that's the only thing that's going to stop me from speaking to your IDF officers. Okay. So, 5 years, where is it at? Great mass movement. So he continues, I do not know what my attitude towards the Jays or social democracy, or rather Marxism in general. See, they always try to label Christians historically as communists, by the way. Look that up. Historically, they try to label Christians as communists. To the social problems, etc., would be today if I had not acquired a stock of personal beliefs at such an early age, by dint of hard study and under the duress of fate. What is fate, bro? For although the misfortunes of the fatherland may have stimulated thousands and thousands to ponder over the inner causes of the collapse, that could not lead to such a thorough knowledge and deep insight as a man may develop who has fought a hard struggle for many years so that he might be master of his own fate. Oh, now we're figuring out why he doesn't mention God. Because he thinks he is God. Is what I've been telling Trump every time he goes live on Instagram. Say, Lo Elohim. You are not Elohim. Lo Mashiach. Lo Amai. Lo Hama. That means you are not Messiah. You are not my people. You will not receive mercy. And I'm not going to do anything physically, by the way, for the record. I do nothing physically. I don't need to. I just speak. That's all I do. All I do is speak. But like I said about the whole Pennsylvania incident, that was almost like a ritual just to tell you your words are gunshots. They consider your words to be violent. Hate speech and all that. Do you understand why they're even doing this? So this is chapter 4 now. This page 1, the end of page 114. This chapter 4 is Munich. Things are about to get interesting, I assume. So, Mr. Hittite says, at last I came to Munich in the spring of 1912. Isn't it 1913 or 1912 was the Titanic? Or was it 1910? Interesting that this stuff is around the Titanic sinking, but anyway. The city itself was as familiar to me as if I had lived for years within its walls, whatever. This was because my studies in architecture had been constantly turning my attention to the metropolis of German art. German art? What is a German? One must know Munich if one would know Germany, and it is impossible to acquire a knowledge of German art without seeing Munich. So then this guy starts, fawning over art and stuff. He's a Renaissance man. All things considered, this pre-war sojourn was by far the happiest and most contented time of my life. Oh yeah, because he allegedly served in World War One. My earnings were very slender, but after all, I did not live for the sake of painting. I painted in order to get the bare necessities of existence while I continued my studies. I was firmly convinced that I should finally succeed in reaching the goal I had marked out for myself, and this conviction alone was strong enough to enable me to bear the petty hardships of everyday life without worrying very much about them. These experiences could be very real and very real to him, because that's a concept in Freemasonry, is that the more you dedicate yourself to it, the higher up you become, and the more financial gain you get, the bigger house you get, more land, etc. So, he continues, moreover, almost from the very first moment of my sojourn there, I came to love that city more than any other place known to me. A German city, he says, just like, I don't know, LA is a American city. What does that mean? New York is an American city. What does that mean? You just look up German history. That's all. They were never heterogeneous. A German city, he said to himself. How different to Vienna. It was with a feeling of disgust that my imagination reverted to that Babylon of races. Interesting how he words things. Another pleasant feature, he's trying to say that Babylon was like multicultural. No, they might have had multicultural sections. They might have had compartmentalization, but literally a nickname for Babylon was Sheshak, which means the great white cop. You understand? Plane flying over or something. Another pleasant feature, he says, here was the way the people spoke German. which was much nearer to my own way of speaking than the Viennese idiom. The Munich idiom recalled the days of my youth, especially when I spoke with those who had come to Munich from Lower Bavaria. This is the same in English. Orge used to mean happy because Gaia means to burst forth. When you're happy, you burst forth and dance around. And now it means something opposite of bursting forth, bursting into and causing cancer in your colon. So he continues, there were 1,000 or more things which I inwardly loved or which I came to love during the course of my stay, but what attracted me most was the marvelous wedlock of native folk energy with the fine artistic spirit of the city. This is what you experience in America when you go to the country in various sections of it. Yeah, the people are nicer, friendlier. They're not necessarily different from other Americans, though, especially if they're starving. So, marvelous wedlock with the fine artistic spirit of the city, that unique harmony from the Hofbrauhaus. Oh, Hofbrauhaus. To the Odeon, from the October Festival to the Pinakothek, etc. Pinakothek? Catonic. This dude's praising one of these Catonic festivals? That's crazy. Pinakothek. That's literally the top pinnacle of Catonic. That's wild. The SS Power is Zeus. Zeus's soldiers or something. Dr. Seuss. He continues, the reason why my heart's strings are entwined around this city as around no other spot in this world is probably because Munich is and will remain inseparably connected with the development of my own career. And the fact that from the beginning of my visit I felt inwardly happy and contented is to be attributed to the charm of the marvelous Wittelsbach capital. Wittelsbach, which has attracted probably everybody who is blessed with a feeling for beauty instead of commercial instincts. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I don't like any concrete slab, no matter how pretty you carve it. He continues, this is page 115. Apart from my professional work, I was most interested in the study of current political events, particularly those which were connected with foreign relations. I approached these by way of the German policy of alliances, which, ever since my Austrian days, I had considered to be an utterly mistaken one. But in Vienna, I had not yet seen quite clearly how far the German Empire had gone in the process of self-delusion. In Vienna, I was inclined to assume, or probably I persuaded myself to do so in order to excuse the German mistake, that possibly the authorities in Berlin knew how weak and unreliable their ally would prove to be when fought face to face with realities. He's trying to make excuses why he was confused, why this master race was confused. This guy's ridiculous. But that, for more or less mysterious reasons, they refrained from allowing their opinions on this point to be known in public. Their idea was that they should support the policy of alliances, which Bismarck had initiated, and the sudden discountenance of which might be undesirable, if for no other reason than that it might arouse those foreign countries which were lying in wait for their chance, or might alarm the Philistines at home. Interesting words you choose. It's like, okay, you want to... This guy's just a hypocrite. He's using Semitic terms for the negative. I hope people are seeing this. But he continues, but my contact with the people soon taught me, to my horror, that my assumptions were wrong. Oh, gee. So if if Germany would be just as superior without the influence of Christianity, then how did you have wrong assumptions if you're the master race? You see, it doesn't make sense. It's all dumb. It's all just fluffing you up. It's patronizing you. Just like they do with Americans. American and German mean the same thing. They're not heterogeneous. They never were. I was amazed to find everywhere, even in circles otherwise well informed, that nobody had the slightest intimation of the real character of the Habsburg monarchy. This is page 116. Among the common people in particular, there was a prevalent illusion that the Austrian ally was a power which would have to be seriously reckoned with and would rally its manpower in the hour of need. The mass of the people continued to look upon the dual monarchy as a German state, just like Democrat and Republican, they look on as a American state, and believed that it could be relied upon. They do the same thing with Israel, with Sephardic and Ashkenazi, and every other nation. Sunni and Shiite, they just do it everywhere. These Soviets. They assumed that its strength could be measured by the millions of its subjects, as was the case in Germany. First of all, they did not realize that Austria had ceased to be a German state, I guess. And secondly, that the conditions prevailing within the Austrian Empire were steadily pushing it headlong to the brink of disaster. The same North and South Civil War. Just doing the same thing. He continues, at that time I knew the condition of affairs in the Austrian state better than the professional diplomats. It's not hard to do, by the way. Blindfolded, as nearly always, these diplomats stumbled along on their way to disaster. The opinions prevailing among the bulk of the people reflected only what had been drummed into them from official quarters above. These higher authorities groveled before the ally as the people of old bowed down before the golden calf. Wow, you sure do get all of your symbolism from scripture, and then you deny its power. You have the appearance of godliness, but deny its power, right? Because you think you are a god, but you're not. We figured that out pretty quick. Especially when America came in and you're like, why are my handlers coming in? Are they going to throw me under the bus? And it said he was shaking like he had the palsy. It's like, yeah, they're going to throw you under the bus, dude. You know too much. You did your job and now they're getting rid of you. So he continues, they probably thought that being polite and amiable, they might balance the lack of honesty on the other side. Thus, they took every declaration at its full face value. Even while in Vienna, I used to be annoyed again and again by the discrepancy between the speeches of the official statesmen and the contents of the Viennese press. And yet Vienna was still a German city, I guess. At least as far as appearances went. Hopefully nobody can hear my stomach growling. But one encountered an utterly different state of things on leaving Vienna, or rather German Austria, and coming into the Slav provinces. It needed only a glance at the Prague newspapers in order to see how the whole exalted hocus pocus of the Triple Alliance was judged from there. In Prague, there was nothing but gibes and sneers for that masterpiece of statesmanship. Even in the piping times of peace, when the two emperors kissed each other on the brow in token of friendship, those papers did not cloak their belief that the alliance would be liquidated the moment a first attempt was made to bring it down from the shimmering glory of a Nibelungen ideal to the plane of practical affairs. I don't know what that means. They usually give like a note for those things. They didn't give a note for this one. Nibelungen. Whatever. It's probably not that important. He says great indignation was aroused a few years later when the alliances were put to the first practical test. Italy not only withdrew from the Triple Alliance, leaving the other two members to march by themselves. Do you understand? That's Hittites and Amalekites. The Amalekites are the messengers, false messengers, and the Hittites fence in and destroy. Italy does that a lot. Like, oh, we'll join you, and then, oh, we're going to pull back so that you get genocided. It's like, what? So he says, Italy not only withdrew from the Triple Alliance, leaving the other two members to march by themselves, but she even joined their enemies. That anybody should believe, even for a moment, in the possibility of such a miracle as that of Italy fighting on the same side as Austria would be simply incredible to anybody who did not suffer from the blindness of official diplomacy. And that was just how people felt in Austria also. In Austria, only the Habsburgs and the German Austrians supported the alliance. The Habsburgs did so from shrewd calculation of their own interests and from necessity. The Germans did it out of good faith and political ignorance. I thought they were superior, though. Do they need the influence of Christianity to help them see? I think so. And I'm going to have to eat after this one and do the other two episodes after I eat because my stomach's being a Democrat right now. All right. So this is page 117. He continues, the 42-minute mark. They acted in good faith inasmuch as they believed that by establishing the Triple Alliance, they were doing a great service to the German Empire and were thus helping to strengthen it and consolidate its defense. They showed their political ignorance, however, in holding such ideas because instead of helping the German Empire, they really chained it to a moribund state which might bring its associate into the grave with itself, and above all, by championing this alliance, they fell more and more a prey to the Habsburg policy of de-Germanization. Remember, what does de-Americanization mean? What does any of these... He's just using these words to control you. He continues, for the alliance gave the Habsburgs good grounds for believing that the German Empire would not interfere in their domestic affairs, and thus they were in a position to carry into effect, with more ease and less risk, their domestic policy of gradually eliminating the German element. There is a truth here. If you look up the war, I always forget which war it is, but it's the infamous one that 50 million Germans were killed. This was sometime in like the 1400s or something like that, 13 or 1400s. And it was like Sweden and France and like the Dutch, and people were fighting with each other. And Germany got involved, and they ended up slaughtering 50 million Germans. 50 million. They estimate 30 to 50 million, but either number is horrifying. So there is a history here he's trying to use to genocide them once again. He's just 5 million alone in World War II were genocided in Dresden. Another 20 million were made homeless. And then they literally put a bunch of their soldiers afterwards in death camps run by Eisenhower. And they starved them to death and all kinds of things. You can look it up. Eisenhower's death camps. Billy Graham went over to meet Eisenhower in the occupied zones, saying God wants him to be president. Isn't that cute? He continues, not only could the objectiveness of the German government be counted upon, and thus there need be no fear of protest from that quarter, but one could always remind the German Austrians of the alliance and thus silence them in case they should ever object to the reprehensible means that were being employed to establish a Slav hegemony in the dual monarchy. This guy is ridiculous. And then he's like demonizing Slavs. He's demonizing my friend Usha, who's my brother. You understand? I spoke to one man in Ukraine. He told me everything I needed to know. That they have a Hebraic language. Hebrew is Ivritz to them. It sounds like Eve's beginning. It sounds like a lot of things. Like Eve's friend's border. Like the friend's border of Eve. A border that's a friend to Eve. There's a lot of ways you can Hebraize that. So they're probably the most Semitic out of the Europeans, or Slavs, and all these people he's demonizing. You understand? He continues, what could the German Austrians do when the people of the German Empire itself had openly proclaimed their trust and confidence in the Habsburg regime? Should they resist and thus be branded openly before their kinsfolk in the Reich as traitors to their own national interest? He's contemplating the tribunals. They who for so many decades had sacrificed so much for the sake of their German tradition, which is not Christianity? I'd like to know what he thinks is German tradition. Oh, when he took control, he made everything look Roman, and he praised Roman art. You can look this up. He's a Soviet, promoting Romanism under the guise of Germanism, whatever that actually even means. It's the same as Americanism. He continues, once the influence of the Germans in Austria had been wiped out, what then would be the value of the alliance? If the Triple Alliance were to be advantageous to Germany, was it not a necessary condition that the predominance of the German element in Austria should be maintained? Or did anyone really believe that Germany could continue to be the ally of a Habsburg Empire under the hegemony of the Slavs? Tell me, Mr. Hittite, what were Germans before? You got Anglos, you got Saxons and Franks. Are Germans Saxons or Franks? Are they Saxon Frank? How far do you want to split these people? Minute 48 here, page 117. He continues, the official attitude of German diplomacy, as well as that of the general public towards internal problems affecting the Austrian nationalities, was not merely stupid, it was insane. On the alliance, as on a solid foundation, they grounded the security and future existence of a nation of 70 millions, while at the same time they allowed their partner to continue his policy of undermining the sole foundation of that alliance methodically and resolutely from year to year. A day must come when nothing but a formal contract with Viennese diplomats would be left. Constitution. The alliance itself, as an effective support, would be lost to Germany. Remember, this guy thinks that German democracy will actually work because it's somehow better because it's German democracy, showing his ignorance or purposeful lying of how democracy actually works and what it actually is. And then he talks about a nation of 70 millions. Gee, if like a couple hundred years ago, 50 million, 30 to 50 million were exterminated in Germany, then what is German now? He knows what he's doing. Or he's just delusional. I don't know. So he continues, as far as concerned Italy, such had been the case from the outset. If people in Germany had studied history and the psychology of nations a little more carefully, not one of them could have believed for a single hour that the Quirinal and the Viennese Hofburg could ever stand shoulder to shoulder on a common battlefront. Italy would have exploded like a volcano if any Italian government had dared to send a single Italian soldier to fight for the Habsburg state. Oh, but you want to team up with Mussolini. This is page 118. He continues, so fanatically hated was this state that the Italians could stand in no other relation to it on a battlefront except as enemies, unless some guy pops up claiming he's not Habsburg. He continues, more than once in Vienna, I have witnessed explosions of the contempt and profound hatred which allied the Italian to the Austrian state. The crimes which the House of Habsburg committed against Italian freedom and independence during several centuries were too grave to be forgiven, even with the best of goodwill. But this goodwill did not exist, either among the rank and file of the population or in the government. Therefore, for Italy, there was only two ways of coexisting with Austria: alliance or war. By choosing the first, it was possible to prepare leisurely for the second. This guy's just a warmonger. He continues, especially since relations between Russia and Austria tended more and more towards the arbitrament of war, the German policy of alliances was as senseless as it was dangerous. Here was a classical instance which demonstrated the lack of any broad or logical lines of thought. Here's an interesting logical line of thought I had the other day watching Animaniacs. They were making fun of the Three Musketeers, and it was in France. And I'm thinking, France aligning with Russia a lot. And then I thought of Muscovites. Then I'm like, Musketeers. It's interesting. But anyway, he continues, but what was the reason for forming the alliance at all? It could not have been other than the wish to secure the future of the Reich better than if it were to depend exclusively on its own resources. But the future of the Reich could not have meant anything else than the problem of securing the means of existence for the German people, whoever that is. The only questions, therefore, were the following. What form shall the life of the nation assume in the near future, that is to say, within such a period as we can forecast? And by what means can the necessary foundation and security be guaranteed for this development within the framework of the general distribution of power among the European nations? A clear analysis of the principles on which the foreign policy of German statecraft were to be based should have led to the following conclusions, according to him. The annual increase of population in Germany amounts to almost 900,000 souls. Well, at least he actually believes in souls. You could just be using the language, but the difficulties. Remember, Babylon numbers you as humans, as just souls. It says that Babylon sells human souls, meaning slaves, it says, but interesting how the Chinese have privately run facilities where they take aborted fetal matter and use it for their science. Could that be what it's saying in Revelation, that Babylon actually sells and trades souls? You think only modern science has done this? It's very, very old. China takes our biomatter and uses it in their experiments to try to de-shem people using certain injectables. But anyway, the difficulties of providing for this army of new citizens must grow. He already sees them as an army right when they're born. Just like the Ants movie. Saw that Ants movie where they just label them a worker or a soldier. The difficulties of providing for this army of new citizens, he says, must grow from year to year and must finally lead to a catastrophe unless ways and means are found which will forestall a danger of misery and hunger. There were 4 ways of providing against this terrible calamity, in his opinion. He says, 1, it was possible to adopt the French example and artificially restrict the number of births, thus avoiding an excess of population. That's a Chinese one-child policy, by the way. Under certain circumstances and periods of distress or under bad climate change, or if the soil yields too poor a return, nature herself tends to check the increase of population in some countries and among some races, but by a method which is quite as ruthless as it is wise. You don't say. It does not impede the procreative faculty as such, but it does impede the further existence of the offspring by submitting it to such tests and privations that everything which is less strong or less healthy, in his opinion, is forced to retreat into the bosom of tile unknown. It's called the Untouchables, by the way. Whatever survives these hardships of existence has been tested and tried 1,000-fold, hardened and refined, fit to continue the process of procreation, so that the same through selection will begin all over again. By thus dealing brutally with the individual and recalling him the very moment he shows that he is not fitted for the trials of life, nature preserves the strength of the race and the species and raises it to the highest degree of efficiency. He's talking just about, he's trying to use just people experiencing and growing as an excuse to wipe people out later. Like, oh, because trees fall over eventually, or some animals push over trees, we can cut down a bunch of trees if we want. But then scripture says, don't besiege the trees. Are they human that they may be besieged by you? You may eat their fruit, but you may not cut them down. Anybody who cuts down a fruit-bearing tree is committing a sin against Torah. Oh, gee, what did George Washington do? He not only cut down a cherry tree, but he cut down his father's cherry tree for no reason other than he's a psychopath. And probably hated his father. Do you understand? So he purposely cuts down the cherry tree. And because he goes and says he cuts it down, that somehow makes him good. It's literally just a cultic metaphor for them genociding Christians. Having the Christians come over to Australia or South Africa or the US, and then they systematically genocide them. It causes them to be slain. They try to take away every resource they can. It's like, well, all that does is it puts these people through trials, and you better watch out once they've gone through them all. So he continues, this page 119. I'm going to end on this page. The decrease in numbers therefore implies an increase of strength. Project Warp Speed, Deagle report. As far as the individual is concerned, and this finally means the invigoration of the species. Okay, so now races or species. He continues, but the case is different when man himself starts the process of numerical restriction. Man is not carved from nature's wood. What does that even mean? He is made of human material. He knows more than the ruthless Queen of Wisdom. He does not impede the preservation of the individual, but prevents procreation itself to the individual, who always sees only himself and not the race. This line of action seems more humane and just than the opposite way, but unfortunately the consequences are also the opposite. He's just telling you certain things here, trying to get you to agree with what he wants to do by saying, by trying to blame God through nature and say, well, God can do it. it's a type of psychology. They do it all the time. He continues, by leaving the process of procreation unchecked and by submitting the individual to the hardest preparatory tests in life, nature selects the best from an abundance of single elements and stamps them as fit to live and carry on the conservation of the species. See, nature, space, science. They just use these words like as things. It's really weird. He continues, but man restricts the procreative faculty and strives obstinately to keep alive at any cost whatever has once been born. This correction of the divine will, wow, seems to him to be wise and humane. Oh, he's saying that it's bad. Okay. He is saying that's bad. Okay. It's interesting. That's the only time he used divine so far, I think. And he rejoices at having trumped nature's card in one game, at least, and thus proved that she is not entirely reliable. That dear little ape of an almighty father is delighted to see and hear that he has succeeded in effecting a numerical restriction, but he would be very displeased if told that this, his system, brings about a degeneration in personal quality. You don't say. He says, for as soon as the procreative faculty is thwarted and the number of births diminished, the natural struggle for existence, which allows only healthy and strong individuals to survive, is replaced by a sheer craze to save feeble and even diseased creatures at any cost. And thus the seeds are sown for human progeny, which will become more and more miserable from one generation to another, as long as nature's will is scorned. He's half right. The reason why they try to keep these people alive and the reason why they do all this stuff for like disabled people is capitalistic government. They don't actually care about them. They only take care of them because they make money by taking care of them. And people can't get that concept because they don't understand how paper money works. They don't understand how this economy works. So I don't have to argue with them. He continues, but if that policy be carried out, the final results must be that such a nation will eventually terminate its own existence on this earth. For though man may defy the eternal laws of procreation during a certain period, vengeance will follow sooner or later. A stronger race will oust that which has grown weak. Remember, it's just Rasas is just dividing. Will oust that which has grown weak, for the vital urge in its ultimate form will burst asunder all the absurd chains of this so-called humane consideration for the individual, and will replace it with the humanity of nature, which wipes out what is weak in order to give place to the strong. So your science books teach you this, by the way. So if you think Hitler's evil for saying it, I think he's evil for saying it, but your history books are too, or your science books, sorry. And with that, I'm going to eat something, and I don't know, maybe I'll come back on at 2 or something. I don't know. Let's play some music. Let's get the mood going. Which one am I going to play here? I'll just play it.
Wait a minute, are you knocking this country? Are you saying something against America?
Against it? I should be positively astounded to hear anything that be said for it. Why, the whole bloody place is the most unspeakable matriarchy in the whole history of civilization. Look at yourself and the way your wife and her strumpet of a mother push you through the hoop.